In the waning days of World War II, as Allied forces closed in on Nazi Germany from every direction, a series of desperate scientific expeditions were launched into the Polish countryside to recover a device so secretive that its very existence has been denied, debunked, and mythologized for nearly 80 years, and what we're about to tell you challenges everything you thought you knew about the final months of the Third Reich. Picture this. It's early 1945, and in an underground facility, hidden beneath layers of concrete and earth, Nazi scientists are racing against time to complete a project codenamed the Bell, a machine described by those who glimpsed it as a massive, metallic, bell-shaped structure standing some 15 feet tall, suspended in a rotating electromagnetic field, producing a humming sound that witnesses claimed could be heard for miles. The stories that emerged from the wreckage of Nazi Germany were so outlandish, so divorced from conventional science, that historians and academics spent decades dismissing them as folklore, as the desperate fabrications of traumatized witnesses, or worse, as the pseudo-scientific fantasies of crackpots and conspiracy theorists eager to resurrect the mystique of the Nazi regime. But what if we've been looking at this all wrong? What if the Nazi Bell wasn't about controlling time at all, but something far more sinister and scientifically grounded? A prototype for a technology that would fundamentally alter the course of human history. A weapon so terrible that it required the combined effort of American, British, and Soviet intelligence agencies to suppress its very mention from the historical record? Let us take you back to the beginning, to the autumn of 1943, when a brilliant Italian theoretical physicist named Massimo Tajoli arrived at a secret military research facility near Wrocław, Poland, bringing with him sketches and calculations that would spark one of the most ambitious and deadly scientific projects of the war. Tajoli, whose work on electromagnetic field manipulation had caught the attention of Nazi military planners, proposed something that seemed to exist at the bleeding edge of physics, a device that could exploit the relationship between electromagnetic energy and gravitational forces, theoretically creating localized distortions in space-time itself. The Nazi leadership, desperate for a wonder weapon that might reverse their deteriorating military position, authorized unlimited funding and resources for what became known internally as Project Die Glocke, Project Time Bell. Scientists and engineers were pulled from across occupied Europe, from universities in France and Holland, from laboratories in Vienna and Prague, all gathering at the ultra-secret facility codenamed Die Glocke, located in the Owl Mountains of Lower Silesia. The men tasked with building this machine were not the caricature of mad Nazi scientists we see in popular culture. They were, in many cases, brilliant physicists and engineers who had been coerced, threatened, or convinced that they were contributing to a defensive weapon that might save their homeland from Soviet invasion. They worked in the dark, literally underground, with little understanding of how their individual contributions fit into the larger project, a compartmentalization strategy that would become a hallmark of the most secret Nazi weapons programs. What they were building, according to the few credible testimonies we have, was a toroidal structure, a shape like a tire or a donut, measuring approximately 9 meters in diameter and 4 meters in height, fabricated from an unknown metallic compound that appeared to shimmer with a strange iridescence, even when unpowered. 16 cylindrical tubes of radioactive material were arranged in a circle within the device, and the entire structure could be rotated at incredible speeds through the application of powerful electromagnetic coils that lined the chamber walls. Witnesses who survived the war and spoke to Allied interrogators described the sound of the bell in operation as otherworldly, a deep, resonant hum that seemed to penetrate bone and tissue, accompanied by strange luminescent effects and a sensation of temporal distortion, as if time itself were behaving erratically in the vicinity of the device. Some described seeing insects and small mammals that had been exposed to the bell's radiation, exhibiting bizarre symptoms, accelerated aging, cellular mutations, and in some cases, what witnesses interpreted as temporal displacement. Creatures that seemed to exist in states between life and death, or whose organic matter appeared to have experienced radically different aging trajectories than control subjects. The question of what exactly was happening in those Polish mountains becomes even more urgent when we consider the testimony of Igor Witkowski, the Polish military historian who, in the 1990s, interviewed Dr. Ludwig Jesmas, a Wehrmacht officer who had been involved with the Zeitgloche project. Witkowski's account, published in his book The Truth About the Wunderwaffe, described the bell as a generator of what Jesmas called virtual particles, subatomic particles that could theoretically be manipulated to create cascading effects in localized spacetime. If such a device had functioned even partially as designed, it might have generated an electromagnetic pulse of staggering proportions, or potentially something even more exotic, a localized bubble of altered spacetime that could theoretically warp electromagnetic radiation or gravitational fields. The implications were staggering. This wasn't a time machine in the science fiction sense, but something potentially far more dangerous. A weapon that might be able to distort the very fabric of reality on a localized level, creating zones of altered physics that could render electronics inoperable, disorient living creatures through disruptions of electromagnetic fields that living organisms depend upon, or, worst of all, create cascading quantum effects that could propagate through matter in unpredictable ways. By 1944, the project had grown to such proportions that it required its own dedicated facility, consuming enormous quantities of electrical power, radioactive materials that had to be synthesized in specialized reactors, and rare metallic compounds that were harvested from across the Nazi sphere of influence. Entire villages were evacuated to make room for the facility and its surrounding security perimeter, and prisoners from concentration camps were transported to work on its construction, with most never returning. The death toll associated with the project remains unknown, but estimates suggest that thousands of workers perished from radiation exposure, industrial accidents, or were simply liquidated to prevent knowledge of the project from spreading. As the war turned increasingly against Germany, and especially after the Soviet advance accelerated in late 1944, the Nazi High Command became obsessed with completing and testing the bell before the Allies could overrun the facility. Multiple test runs were authorized in early 1945, with increasingly spectacular results according to the fragmentary testimony that has survived. One witness, a doctor, Rolf Schumann, allegedly described a test that took place in March 1945, where the bell, when activated, created a luminous sphere that expanded outward from the device, causing nearby trees to be stripped of bark and their internal structures to be somehow aged at an accelerated rate, leaving them looking like bleached, desiccated husks. Another account spoke of a test where the bell was energized to full power for the first time, resulting in a phenomenon described as a time distortion in the immediate vicinity of the device. Witnesses reported that their watches had stopped, that their sense of time became distorted, and that when the device was shut down, they felt as though hours had passed when in fact only minutes had elapsed. Whether these accounts describe actual exotic physics or the psychological effects of radiation poisoning and fear remains one of history's enduring mysteries. What we do know with certainty is that as the Soviet army advanced toward the facility in the winter of 1945, the Nazi authorities made the decision to evacuate the project and destroy all evidence of its existence. In January 1945, the bell was disassembled, placed on a special truck, and transported westward toward the Czechoslovak border, along with its scientific team and a cadre of SS officers tasked with ensuring that it never fell into enemy hands. The facility itself was destroyed with dynamite, and a special team of soldiers executed all remaining workers and guards who might have possessed knowledge of the project. The subsequent fate of the Bell became one of the great unsolved mysteries of the post-war period. Some accounts suggested that it reached Austria and was hidden in an alpine cave to await discovery by American forces. Others claimed that it had been deliberately destroyed by its creators, rather than allowing it to be captured. Still others, more darkly, suggested that it had fallen into the hands of either American or Soviet intelligence agencies, who immediately suppressed all information about it to prevent knowledge of the technology from becoming public. The American military's Operation Paperclip was launched in 1945 with the express purpose of recovering Nazi scientists and technology before the Soviets could access them, and among the targets were the scientists and engineers who had worked on the Bell project. Several key personnel were indeed captured and debriefed by American intelligence, but the information they provided was immediately classified at the highest levels, and the scientists themselves were essentially disappeared from public record, their fates unknown to this day. This is where the historical record becomes murky, where testimony becomes unreliable, where the distinction between fact and legend becomes nearly impossible to discern. But here's what makes the Nazi Bell story so captivating and so historically significant. It sits at the intersection of three powerful human impulses: the desire to uncover hidden history, the fascination with advanced weaponry, and the yearning to believe that science might accomplish the seemingly impossible. For decades, the Bell remained purely in the realm of legend and conspiracy theory, mentioned in fringe historical circles and dismissed by mainstream historians as apocryphal at best, propaganda at worst. But beginning in the 1990s, credible researchers began attempting to reconstruct what the Bell might have actually been, drawing on declassified documents, interviews with survivors, and analysis of Nazi scientific publications that had been archived in various European repositories. What emerged was a more nuanced picture. The Bell was not a time machine, but it almost certainly was an experimental electromagnetic generator designed to test theories about electromagnetic field manipulation that were, at the time, at the very frontier of physics. The Nazi regime was intensely interested in exotic physics and alternative theories that might yield military advantages. And there is documented evidence of investment in numerous seemingly crackpot projects: perpetual motion machines, scalar electromagnetic devices, and other experimental apparatus that violated no laws of physics, but pushed theoretical boundaries in ways that were scientifically unconventional. The Bell may have been one such project, and if we accept the testimony of the people who actually worked on it, it appears to have achieved some remarkable results in terms of generating localized electromagnetic phenomena, and possibly some kind of exotic radiation that affected organic matter in unusual ways. The scientific consensus today, of course, is that the Bell could not have manipulated time, could not have created true space-time distortions, and could not have been the superweapon that some accounts claimed. But this dismissal may have led historians to overlook something important. The Bell may not have been a failure at all. If the device successfully generated some kind of exotic electromagnetic radiation or novel form of particle radiation, it might have been quite interesting from a scientific standpoint. And more importantly, it might have been threatening enough that the Allies and Soviets both decided that the world was better off not knowing about it. The post-war suppression of information about the Bell project is itself a historical fact, even if the Bell itself remains somewhat enigmatic. We can document the removal of key scientists from circulation, the destruction of files, the official denials, and the classified documents that even today remain inaccessible to researchers. This cover-up, whatever its justifications, created a historical vacuum that has been filled by speculation, mythology, and in some cases, deliberate disinformation designed to discredit the entire subject. The question that historians grapple with today is not whether the bell was a time machine or a superweapon that could level cities, but rather, what was it, and why was it considered important enough to suppress from the historical record? The answer likely lies somewhere in the mundane and the extraordinary, a device that pushed the boundaries of what was technically possible in 1945, that demonstrated some unusual physical phenomena, but that ultimately proved impractical for the purposes its creators had hoped. But impractical weapons are still weapons, and technologies that generate dangerous radiation are still dangerous. And it is entirely plausible that the decision was made to erase the bell from history, not because it was too fantastical to be real, but because it was real enough to be genuinely concerning. The subsequent decades saw the rise of new theoretical frameworks in physics, particularly the development of quantum electrodynamics and later quantum field theory, which provided far more sophisticated understanding of the relationship between matter, energy, and fundamental forces than anything the Nazi physicists could have imagined. These new theories suggested that some of what the bell's creators thought they might accomplish was indeed impossible. The laws of physics simply don't allow for the kind of controlled, localized, space-time manipulation that seemed to be implied in some of the more dramatic accounts. Yet other aspects of what the bell might have done, the generation of novel forms of radiation, the ability to affect biological matter in unusual ways, the creation of intense localized electromagnetic fields, these remain well within the realm of what's theoretically and practically possible. And so, the legend persists, generation after generation, drawing in researchers and conspiracy theorists and genuine historians in equal measure, all seeking to understand what really happened in those Polish mountains in the closing days of World War II. The popular media has seized upon the Bell story, spinning it into a kind of supernatural legend, a harbinger of Nazi super science that might have changed the course of the war had only the Allies arrived a few weeks later. This narrative is almost certainly exaggerated, but like all legends, it contains kernels of truth that are worth taking seriously. The truth is that Nazi Germany did conduct exotic physics research, that some of these projects did achieve surprising results, that key scientists were spirited away to the United States and the Soviet Union after the war, and that information about some of these projects was deliberately suppressed. Whether the bell specifically was a revolutionary device or a well-intentioned failure in physics remains ultimately unknowable. But the effort to build it, the resources devoted to it, and the subsequent determination to erase it from history all speak to something significant happening in those tunnels beneath the Polish landscape. What we can say with certainty is this: the Nazi bell reminds us that the history of World War II and the immediate post-war period remains incompletely understood, that there are still vast archives of information that remain classified or hidden, and that the intersection of advanced science and total war produces consequences that reverberate across decades. The bell is a mystery, but mysteries exist to be solved, and each new document that emerges from declassified archives, each new testimony from elderly survivors, each new analysis by careful historians brings us incrementally closer to understanding what really happened. Whether that understanding will confirm the romantic legends or deflate them with mundane explanation remains to be seen. But the search itself is worthwhile, because it teaches us that history is not settled, that the past continues to speak to us if we listen carefully enough, and that the decisions made by those who came before us to hide information, to suppress knowledge, to rewrite narratives, continue to shape what we know about ourselves and our world. The Nazi bell may never give up all its secrets, but the very fact that we continue to ask questions about it, that we refuse to accept simple explanations, that we insist on digging deeper into the historical record, represents something profoundly important about how we relate to our past and how we resist the easy dismissal of inconvenient truths. In the end, The Nazi bell is not about time travel or superweapons or the super science of the Third Reich. It is about the human drive to understand, to question, and to seek truth even when that truth has been deliberately hidden from us. It is a reminder that history is written by the victors, but that the victors do not always tell us everything, and that sometimes the most important historical lessons come not from understanding what happened, but from understanding what people wanted so desperately to hide.